Well, good afternoon, everyone. I decided I was reading through these yesterday. I'm doing a course with Michael Martin on Christian Romanticism, and he included Duino Elegies in there, um, which was great. I actually bought this book quite a while ago on his recommendation, and so it was nice to be able to go through it together. And I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I'm not going to elaborate on Rilke. I don't feel like I have the expertise or, too much insight. I can, in the words of George MacDonald, I can tell you what it means to me. That's what I can do. Or I can, kind of share what that's doing. Hey, nice to see you here. So this is going to be a lot of reading, but wait, no, don't. I'm always really nervous about these little monologue thingies here, but I just felt like doing this, so I thought I would. I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I'd love it if somebody jumped in with me and we could just, hash it out. What's interesting about a lot of these is that Rilke asks a lot of questions in these elegies, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to try to answer them to the best of our ability? That is, not that we have any perfect answers or, certain answers or anything, but what does it mean to us? So I'm going to read the first, the second, the fourth, and the eighth, and the ninth elegy, and they're not that long. I didn't choose super long ones, and then there's a couple other things I thought I'd read in connection with them, especially with the ninth elegy. And if anybody wants to join me, that'd be great. I'll just read for now, and if people jump in, then we can talk about it. All right, so I'll do my darndest with the reading here. Okay, the first elegy by Rainer Maria Rilke, and this is translated by Stephen Mitchell. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure. And we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying. And so I hold myself back and swallow the call note of my dark sobbing. Ah, whom can we ever turn to in our need? Not angels, not humans. And already the knowing animals are aware that we are not really at home in our interpreted world. I've also got chicks in the incubator, so if you guys hear birds, that's just them. Perhaps there remains for us some tree on a hillside, which every day we can take into our vision. There remains for us yesterday's street, and the loyalty of a habit, so much at ease when it stayed with us that it moved in and never left. Oh, and night. There is night, when a wind full of infinite space gnaws at our faces. Whom would it not remain for, that longed after, mildly disillusioning presence which the solitary heart so painfully meets? Is it any less difficult for lovers? But they keep on using each other to hide their own fate. Don't you know yet? Fling the emptiness out of your arms into the spaces we breathe. Perhaps the birds will feel the expanded air with more passionate flying. Yes, the springtimes needed you. Often a star was waiting for you to notice it. A wave rolled toward you out of the distant past, or as you walked under an open window, a violin yielded itself to your hearing. All this was mission. But could you accomplish it? Weren't you always distracted by expectation, as if every event announced a beloved? Where can you find a place to keep her, with all the huge, strange thoughts inside of you, going and coming, and often staying all night? But when you feel longing, sing of women in love, for their famous passion is still not immortal. Sing of women abandoned and desolate. You envy them, almost. Who could love so much more purely than those who were gratified? Begin again and again the never attainable praising. Remember, the hero lives on. Even his downfall was merely a pretext for achieving his final birth. But nature, spent and exhausted, takes lovers back into herself, as if there were not enough strength to create them a second time. Have you imagined Gaspar Estampa intensely enough so that any girl deserted by her beloved might be inspired by that fierce example of soaring, objectless love, and might say to herself, perhaps I can be like her? Shouldn't this most ancient of sufferings finally grow more fruitful for us? Isn't it time that we lovingly freed ourselves from the beloved and quivering endured as the arrow endures the bowstring's tension, so that gathered in the snap of release it can be more than itself? For there is no place where we can remain. Voices, voices, listen, my heart, as only saints have listened, until the gigantic call lifted them off the ground. Yet they kept on, impossibly, kneeling, and didn't notice at all. So complete was their listening. Not that you could endure God's voice, far from it, but listen to the voice of the wind and the ceaseless message that forms itself out of silence. It is murmuring toward you now from those who died young. Didn't their fate, whenever you stepped into a church in Naples or Rome, quietly come to address you? Or high up, some eulogy entrusted you with a mission, as last year on the plaque in Santa Maria Formosa? What they want of me is that I gently remove the appearance of injustice about their death, which at times slightly hinders their souls from proceeding onward. Of course, it is strange to inhabit the earth no longer, to give up customs one barely had time to learn, not to see roses and other promising things in terms of human future, no longer to be what one was in infinitely anxious hands, to leave even one's own first name behind, forgetting it as easily as a child abandons a broken toy. Strange to no longer desire one's desires. Strange to see meanings that clung together once, floating away in every direction. And being dead is hard work and full of retrieval before one can gradually feel a trace of eternity. Though the living are wrong to believe in the too sharp distinctions which they themselves have created. Angels, they say, don't know whether it is the living they are moving among or the dead. The eternal torrent whirls all ages along in it, through both realms forever, and their voices are drowned out in its thunderous roar. In the end, those who were carried off early no longer need us. They are weaned from earth's sorrows and joys as gently as children outgrow the soft breasts of their mothers. But we who do need such great mysteries, we for whom grief is so often the source of our spirit's growth, could we exist without them? Is the legend meaningless that tells how, in the lament for Linus, the daring first notes of song pierced through the barren numbness? And then, in the startled space which a youth as lovely as a god had suddenly left forever, the void felt for the first time that harmony which now enraptures and comforts and helps us. Oh, hey, everybody. We have people here. Nice. Hi, Abby. Hi, Anselman. You and Rilke have a beef? The wind is often a whisper from God. Yeah, beautiful. So I thought maybe I'll just read a couple things out of that first one that really spoke to me. Let me see here. I like this. Fling the emptiness out of your arms into the spaces we breathe. Perhaps the birds will feel the expanded air with more passionate flying. This reminds me of the 8th elegy. There's a, if I can remember it when I'm reading it, I might refer back to that because there's something very akin to what he's talking about in the 8th elegy. And this part here. Voices, voices, listen, my heart, as only saints have listened, until the gigantic call lifted them off the ground. Yet they kept on, impossibly, kneeling, and didn't notice at all. So complete was their listening. Didn't Paul Vanderklay just talk about a book about flying saints? I thought of that. I don't remember what it was called. Maybe somebody could put it in the chat. I thought of that. The gigantic call lifted them off the ground, yet they kept on impossibly kneeling and didn't notice at all. So complete was their listening. Wow. Strange to no longer desire one's desires. Strange to see meanings that clung together once, floating away in every direction. And being dead is hard work and full of retrieval before one can gradually feel a trace of eternity. Yep, some good ones in there. All right, I'm going to read the second one now. And he starts the second one with a line from the first one. In the first one, he says, "Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure. And we are so odd because it serenely disdains to annihilate us." And then he says, every angel is terrifying. Yeah, I think that's probably the best part of it. So in the second elegy, he starts out with every angel is terrifying. Every angel is terrifying, and yet, alas, I invoke you, almost deadly birds of the soul, knowing about you. Where are the days of Tobias, when one of you, veiling his radiance, stood at the front door, slightly disguised for the journey, no longer appalling, a young man like the one who curiously peeked through the window? But if the archangel now, perilous, from behind the stars, took even one step down towards us, our own heart beating higher and higher, would beat us to death. Who are you? Early successes, creation's pampered favorites, mountain ranges, peaks growing red in the dawn of all beginning, pollen of the flowering Godhead, joints of pure light, corridors, stairways, thrones, space formed from essence, shields made of ecstasy, storms of emotion whirled into rapture, and suddenly, alone, mirrors, which scoop up the beauty that has streamed from their face and gather it back into themselves entire. But we, when moved by deep feeling, evaporate. We breathe ourselves out and away. From moment to moment, our emotion grows fainter, like a perfume. Though someone may tell us, yes, you've entered my bloodstream, the room, the whole springtime is filled with you. What does it matter? He can't contain us. We vanish inside him and around him, and those who are beautiful, oh, who can retain them? Appearance ceaselessly rises in their face and is gone, like dew from the morning grass. What is ours floats into the air, like steam from a dish of hot food. Oh, smile, where are you going? Oh, upturned glance, new warm receding wave on the sea of the heart. Alas, but that is what we are. Does the infinite space we dissolve into taste of us then? Do the angels really reabsorb only the radiance that streamed out from themselves? Or sometimes, as if by an oversight, is there a trace of our essence in it as well? Are we mixed in with their features, even as slightly as that vague look in the faces of pregnant women? They do not notice it. How could they notice in their swirling return to themselves? Lovers, if they knew how, might utter strange, marvelous words in the night air, for it seems that everything hides us. Look, trees do exist. The houses that we live in still stand. We alone fly past all things, as fugitive as the wind. And all things conspire to keep silent about us, half out of shame perhaps, half as unutterable hope. Lovers, gratified in each other, I am asking you about us. You hold each other. Where is your proof? Look, sometimes I find my hands have become aware of each other, or that my time-worn face shelters itself inside them. That gives me a slight sensation. But who would dare to exist just for that? You, though, who in the other's passion grow until, overwhelmed, he begs you no more. You who beneath his hands swell with abundance like autumn grapes. You who may disappear because the other has wholly emerged. I am asking you about us. I know you touch so blissfully because the caress preserves, because the place you so tenderly cover does not vanish, because underneath it you feel pure duration. So you promise eternity, almost, from the embrace. And yet, when you have survived the terror of the first glances, the longing at the window, and the first walk together, once only through the garden, lovers, are you the same? When you lift yourselves up to each other's mouth, and your lips join drink against drink, oh, how strangely each drinker seeps away from his action. Weren't you astonished by the caution of human gestures on attic gravestones? Wasn't love and departure placed so gently on shoulders that it seemed to be made of a different substance than in our world? Remember the hands, how weightlessly they rest, though there is power in the torsos. These self-mastered figures know we can go this far, this is ours, to touch one another this lightly. The gods can press down harder upon us, but that is the gods' affair. If only we too could discover a pure, contained human place, our own strip of fruit-bearing soil between river and rock, for our own heart always exceeds us, as theirs did. and we can no longer follow it, gazing into images that soothe it or into the godlike bodies, where measured more greatly, it achieves a greater repose. Hi, Maxine. It's nice to have you. I threw a link in if anybody wants to join me. Every moment of me against every moment of you. Yes, they go together, don't they? I'm not sure I can just pull things out of this because it's just so, everything is just so intertwined. Because that's what the poem's doing. It's intertwining everything. All right, we're going to the fourth elegy now. All right, here we go. O trees of life, when does your winter come? We are not in harmony. Our blood does not forewarn us like migratory birds. Late, overtaken, we force ourselves abruptly onto the wind and fall to earth at some iced-over lake. Flowering and fading come to us both at once. And somewhere, lions still roam and never know, in their majestic power, of any weakness. But we, while we are intent upon one object, already feel the pull of another. Conflict is second nature to us. Aren't lovers always arriving at each other's boundaries? Although they promised vastness, hunting, home. As when for some quick sketch, a wide background of contrast is laboriously prepared so that we can see more clearly, we never know the actual, vital contour of our own emotions, just what forms them from outside. Who has not sat, afraid, before his heart's curtain? It rose, the scenery of farewell, easy to recognize, the well-known garden which swayed a little. Then the dancer came, not him, enough. However lightly he moves, he's costumed, made up, an ordinary man who hurries home and walks in through the kitchen. I won't endure these half-filled human masks. Better the puppet. It at least is full. I'll put up with the stuffed skin, the wire, the face. That is nothing but appearance. Here, I'm waiting. Even if the lights go out, even if someone tells me that's all, even if emptiness floats toward me in a gray draft from the stage, even if not one of my silent ancestors stays seated with me, not one woman, not the boy with the immovable brown eye. I'll sit here anyway. One can always watch. Am I not right? You, to whom life tasted so bitter after you took a sip of mine, the first gritty infusion of my will. Father, who, as I grew up, kept on tasting and troubled by the aftertaste of so strange a future, searched my unfocused gaze. You who, so often since you died, have trembled for my well-being, within my deepest hope, relinquishing that calmness which the dead feel as their very essence, countless realms of equanimity for my scrap of life. Tell me, am I not right? And you, dear women, who must have loved me for my small beginning of love toward you, which I always turned away from because the space in your features grew, changed, even while I loved it, into cosmic space, where you no longer were. Am I not right to feel as if I must stay seated, must wait before the puppet stage, or rather gaze at it so intensely that at last, to balance my gaze, an angel has to come and make the stuffed skins startle into life? Angel and puppet, a real play finally. Then what we separate by our very presence can come together. And only then the whole cycle of transformation will arise out of our own life seasons. Above, beyond us, the angel plays. If no one else, the dying must notice how unreal, how full of pretense is all that we accomplish here, where nothing is allowed to be itself. O hours of childhood, when behind each shape more than the past appeared, and what streamed out before us was not the future. We felt our bodies growing, and were at times impatient to be grown up, half for the sake of those with nothing left but their grown-upness. Yet were, when playing by ourselves, enchanted with what alone endures, and we would stand there in the infinite blissful space between world and toy, at a point which, from the earliest beginning, had been established for a pure event. Who shows a child as he really is? Who sets him in his constellation and puts the measuring rod of distance in his hand? Who makes his death out of gray beard, which hardens, or leaves it there inside his round mouth, jagged as the core of a sweet apple? Murderers are easy to understand, but this, that one can contain death, the whole of death, even before life has begun, can hold it to one's heart gently, and not refuse to go on living, is inexpressible. Okay, we got some comments. Happy. Hey, Matt. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Yeah, the trees are just. Actually, I read a Substack this morning from Eugene Terrakin about trees. He did a little Substack on Tolkien's relationship to trees. He's a Inklings scholar, so yeah, trees are pretty magical, Anselman. Yeah, that's a really good part there, Abby. There's also this part in there. Oh no, that's in the one that I read before. It's in number 2. I think he's talking about the same thing, actually. This is my interpretation, okay? Where is it? Or maybe it was in number 1. No. It was about the bowstring. Well, I can't find it, which is not surprising. Maybe it's in the first one. Here it is. It's in the first one. Isn't it time that we lovingly freed ourselves from the beloved and quivering endured as the arrow endures the bowstring's tension, so that gathered in the snap of release, it can be more than itself? For there is no place where we can remain. I think that's very much akin to what he's saying. But this, that one can contain death, the whole of death, even before life has begun, can hold it to one's heart gently and not refuse to go on living, is inexpressible. I think those are very much related. All right, now we're going to move to the 8th elegy, which is my favorite because it's all about animals. And I was just delighted when I read this because I thought, no, I don't have to write a poem about it because Rilke already did. I'm lazy. Okay, ready? This is a good one, guys. With all its eyes, the natural world looks out into the open. Only our eyes are turned backward and surround plant, animal, child like traps as they emerge into their freedom. We know what is really out there only from the animal's gaze. For we take the very young child and force it around so that it sees objects and not the open, which is so deep in animals' faces. When he talks about the open, he has a capital O here. Free from death. We only can see death. The free animal has its decline in back of it, forever, and God in front. And when it moves already in eternity, like a fountain. Never, not for a single day, do we have before us that pure space into which flowers endlessly open. Always there is world, and never nowhere without the no. That pure, unseparated element which one breathes without desire and endlessly knows. A child may wander there for hours, through the timeless stillness, may get lost in it and be shaken back. Or someone dies and is it. For nearing death, one doesn't see death, but stares beyond, perhaps with an animal's vast gaze. Lovers, if the beloved were not there, blocking the view, are close to it and marvel, as if by some mistake it opens for them behind each other. But neither can move past the other, and it changes back to world. Forever turned toward objects, we see in them the mere reflection of the realm of freedom which we have dimmed. Or when some animal mutely, serenely looks us through and through. That is what fate means, to be opposite. To be opposite and nothing else forever. If the animal moving toward us so securely in a different direction had our kind of consciousness, it would wrench us around and drag us along its path. But it feels its life as boundless, unfathomable, and without regard to its own condition, pure, like its outward gaze. And where we see the future, it sees all time, and itself within all time, forever healed. Yet in the alert, warm animal, there lies the pain and burden of an enormous sadness. For it too feels the presence of what often overwhelms us, a memory as if the element we keep pressing toward was once more intimate, more true, and our communion infinitely tender. Here all is distance. There it was breath. After that first home, the second seems ambiguous and drafty. O bliss of the tiny creature, which remains forever inside the womb that was its shelter. Joy of the gnat, which still within leaps up even at its marriage. For everything is womb. And look at the half assurance of the bird, which knows both inner and outer from its source, as if it were the soul of an Etruscan, flown out of a dead man, received inside a space, but with his reclining image as the lid. And how bewildered is any womb-born creature that has to fly? As if terrified and fleeing from itself, it zigzags through the air the way a crack runs through a teacup. So the bat quivers along the porcelain of evening. And we, spectators, always, everywhere, turned toward the world of objects, never outward. It fills us. We arrange it. It breaks down. We rearrange it, and then break down ourselves. Who has twisted around us like this, so that no matter what we do, we are in the posture of someone going away? Just as, upon the farthest hill, which shows him his whole valley, one last time he turns, stops, lingers. So we live here, forever taking leave. Oh, okay. Whoops. Not convinced literal animals? I thought animals were alive, Abby. Are you talking about the ones on the page? Yeah. Yeah. There's a hint there. There's a little hint about his father. He also talks about in the elegies, he talks about his how does he put it? He has some beautiful lines about mother and motherhood and mothers. But he also talks about his own mother as being somewhat distant, or that's the impression I had. Yeah. Well, there's a ton of stuff in here. I mean, I would love to just have a conversation about this poem with someone. But of course, while I was reading it, I was kept thinking of Douglas Harding, talking about how when we look in the mirror, and the image that we see, we believe that that's what we are. The teenager phase. And he calls that hell. He says, no wonder teenagers are so angry. Because that's hell. You're not what you look like. Yeah, I thought of that while I was reading this, because he says, only our eyes are turned backward and surround plant, animal, and child like traps as they emerge into their freedom. We know what is really out there only from the animal's gaze, for we take the very young child and force it around so that it sees objects, not the open, which is so deep in animals' faces, free from death. That's exactly what Douglas Harding's talking about. So there are very many passages in here that I love. There are a couple of sentences that are amazing. Well, yeah. This is what fate means, to be opposite and nothing else forever. A little something to think about there. Haven't a clue, but I like it. Which means it's just gonna, work its way in. And then if the animal moving towards us so securely in a different direction had our consciousness, it would wrench us around and drag us along its path. That's another nod to Harding not that Rilke was nodding to him, but that's what I see. But it feels its life as boundless, unfathomable, and without regard to its own condition. Pure, he calls that. Pure, like its outward gaze. And where we see the future, it sees all time, and itself within all time, forever healed. That reminds me of Anselman's favorite novel, Lilith. I don't know if you've read it yet, Anselman. Your countryman wrote an amazing book. And that's what happens. That's what happens to Lilith. She gets healed. I like this one too. As if terrified, oh no, here. And how bewildered is any womb-born creature that has to fly. As if terrified and fleeing from itself, it zigzags through the air the way a crack runs through a teacup. So the bat quivers across the porcelain of evening. That's just an amazing line. Oh yes, yes, Hanselman. The human face does shine with the inner self. I wrote a poem about that long, long time ago. And yes, the face in the mirror can change. Not yet. That gives me hope. Isn't that a great line? So the bat quivers across the porcelain of evening. That's just great. And we, spectators, always, everywhere, turn toward the world of objects, never outward. That harkens back to his fourth elegy where he's sitting in front of the puppets, you know? It fills us. We arrange it. It breaks down. We rearrange it and then break down ourselves. Good lines, Rilke. All right, now I'm going to go on to the 9th elegy. This is the last elegy that I'm going to read. And then I have a couple other things that are connected in my mind anyway to the 9th elegy. Let's find it. All right. This is a good one too. This is another. I think I love the 8th and the 9th elegies the most so far. Although the 1st and 2nd are good too. And so is the 4th. I can't decide. I was out among the bats the other evening. Yeah. You know, I went canoeing the other day and I was going past a tree that had fallen in the water and the butt end of the log was sticking up. It was a tight spot. And I went to grab the butt end of the log to push myself. And there was a bat sleeping on it in the middle of the day, just laying there. And it was fine. Like, it wasn't sick. It was all tucked in. It was so cute. And I spoke to it, and its little ear was in my direction. I don't know why I needed an ear. I mean, I think it could probably hear pretty good. But yeah, bats, amazing little creatures. Bats and platypus, what are they? All right, 9th elegy. Why, if this interval of being can be spent serenely in the form of a laurel, slightly darker than all other green, with tiny waves on the edges of every leaf, like a smile of a breeze, why then have to be human and escaping from fate, keep longing for fate? I have to read that again. I think I read it wrong. Why, if this interval of being can be spent serenely in the form of a laurel, slightly darker than all other green, with tiny waves on the edges of every leaf, like the smile of a breeze, why then have to be human and escaping from fate, keep longing for fate? Oh, not because happiness exists, that too hasty profit snatched from approaching loss, not out of curiosity, not as practice for the heart, which would exist in the laurel too, but because truly being here is so much, because everything here apparently needs us, this fleeting world, which in some strange way keeps calling to us, the most fleeting of all. Once for each thing, just once, no more, and we too, just once, and never again. But to have been this once, completely, even if only once, to have been at one with the earth, seems beyond undoing. And so we keep pressing on, trying to achieve it, trying to hold it firmly in our simple hands, in our overcrowded gaze, in our speechless heart, trying to become it. Whom can we give it to? We would hold on to it all forever. Ah, but what can we take along into that other realm? Not the art of looking, which is learned so slowly, and nothing that happened here. Nothing. The sufferings, then, and above all, the heaviness and the long experience of love. Just what is wholly unsayable. But later, among the stars, what good is it? They are better as they are, unsayable. For when the traveler returns from the mountain slopes into the valley, he brings not a handful of earth, unsayable to others, but instead some word he has gained, some pure word, the yellow and blue gentian. Perhaps we are here in order to say, house, bridge, fountain, gate, pitcher, fruit tree, window. At most, column, tower. But to say them, you must understand. Oh, to say them more intensely than the things themselves ever dreamed of existing. Isn't the secret intent of this taciturn earth, when it forces lovers together, that inside their boundless emotion all things may shudder with joy? Threshold, what it means for two lovers to be wearing down imperceptibly the ancient threshold of their door. They too, after the many who came before them and before those to come, lightly. Here's the time for the sayable. Here is its homeland. Speak and bear witness. More than ever, the things that we might experience are vanishing, for what crowds them out and replaces them is an imageless act, an act under a shell which easily cracks open as soon as the business inside outgrows it and seeks new limits. Between the hammers our heart endures, just as the tongue does between the teeth, and despite that, still is able to praise. Praise this world to the angel, not the unsayable one. You can't impress him with glorious emotion. In the universe where he feels more powerfully, you are a novice. So show him. Show him something simple which formed over generations, lives as our own, near our hand and within our gaze. Tell him of things. He will stand astonished, as you stood by the rope maker in Rome or the potter along the Nile. Show him how happy a thing can be, how innocent and ours, how even lamenting grief purely decides to take form, serves as a thing, or dies into a thing, and blissfully escapes far beyond the violin. And these things, which live by perishing, know you are praising them. Transient, they look to us for deliverance, us, the most transient of all. They want us to change them, utterly in our invisible heart, within, oh, endlessly within us, whoever we may be at last. Earth, isn't this what you want? To arise within us, invisible? Isn't it your dream to be wholly invisible someday? Oh, earth invisible! What if not transformation is your urgent command? Earth, my dearest, I will. Oh, believe me, you no longer need your springtimes to win me over. One of them, even one, is already too much for my blood. Unspeakably I have belonged to you, and from the first you were always right, and your holiest inspiration is our intimate companion, death. Look, I am living. On what? Neither childhood nor future grows any smaller. Superabundant being wells up in my heart. Oh, that's a good one. Does anybody have any thoughts on that one? Because I have a couple of things, other things I want to read in connection to that last one. Does God write exhortations like this within himself? Is that a question, Abby? Or is that a quote from, I don't remember reading that. Yeah, I figured you must have. I figured you must have misunderstood him because I'm like, what do you mean you have a beef with Rilke? Mm. Question or meditation, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a very sacramental point of view, and incarnational point of view, um, of what the earth is doing. I just think of all creation groans and waits, which is a birthing metaphor, right? We're born, we're being born in a womb. I see. Yeah, that's really great too, Anselman. Each once stays, yeah, and that's all we have, right? Like I found there's a real exhortation in that onceness that he starts propounding there, because you're like, oh yeah, wait, this is not a do-over. I can't just keep, everything is just once. It's all just once. I also like that he says, here is the time for the sayable. Here is its homeland. Speak and bear witness. More than ever, the things that we might experience are vanishing. And of course, that reminded me of Barfield's Saving the Appearances, right? Which, yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of stuff in here that I would love to talk about. I like the part where he says to tell the angel of the things, right? The things that are yours. Show him something simple, which formed over generations lives as our own, near our hand and within our gaze. Tell him, it's like express to him your own wonder at the beauty of creation. He will stand astonished as you stood by the rope maker in Rome or the potter along the Nile. Show him how happy a thing can be, how innocent and ours. Just really beautiful. All right, so there's a couple things I wanted to read in connection to that. Or maybe I should save that page, actually. I'll save that so I can grab it after. First of all, I just want to read, and I've read this before. I think I read it a couple times in some live streams, so maybe not everybody's heard it. But this is from John O'Donohue, and it's something that I transcribed out of a video that I watched of him. Beauty shines with the light from beyond itself, and love is the name of that light, and beauty is attractive because it has at its heart some profound equanimity. It's not just the preserve of special elite luxury moments, but beauty is also close to the fractured side of experience. And I mean, this is very much Rilke. Beauty dwells in the palace of broken tenderness, and no life is without its broken, empty spaces. And, like Rilke in that one, I can't remember which one it was, maybe it was the second one, he talks about not being able to be there for his lover because when he looks at her face, he gets lost in some kind of cosmic world. It's just all too much for him. And then he's no longer there, which is a beautiful image, but it also means a broken heart. Right? In Ireland, we have often, in different villages or country areas, the phenomenon of the haunted house. And the haunted house would be a house in which some room has a presence from another world in it. And it's a kind of timeless room that all through years, that all through the years, that the strain of this otherworldliness still continues to preside and dominate there. And sometimes in the heart, there is often a haunted room too, where old loss gathers together and has that timeless strain of something bearing in on the life. And every life is framed by loss, and pathos awakens in the presence of loss and the presence of grief. And I always think that one of the moments of huge pathos is when somebody you love dies, and when you have to come then sometime after their death and take their things and gather up all their different belongings, and suddenly you see their clothes and different objects they have, and you know they will never wear them again. And there's a huge kind of pathos in that. And pathos is, I suppose, the enduring witness to where our hearts have dwelt. I love that line. Pathos is the enduring witness to where our hearts have dwelt. You know, if you love somebody and you're together in a beautiful place, and then the relationship breaks up, and then you're back alone again in that beautiful place, that's the experience of pathos. The beauty of the place will never be the same to you again because of the first way you shared it, in the excitement of love. And now that that has vanished, there's some kind of lonesomeness, some kind of trace of past intimacy left from what has now become broken. And I suppose the great force in life which creates most pathos is death. And death is one of the amazing experiences in the world, one of the amazing events and realities. And usually we think of the grief and pathos of death in relation to those who are left behind. And when the person departs, you know, you're only grieving for yourself. But yet, that is to be blind. To say that is to be blind to the loss and the pathos that must also be there for the person who is dying. Because for the dying one, this is the first time that they are about to suffer the loss of the world. And when I think of my own death, I think one of the things that I will really find hard and miss immensely is the world, because I love the world so much. I think it's such a privilege to be here, and it's such an amazing, enthralling privilege and adventure, and to think that you're letting that slip away from you. You know, everything that happened to you during this life. All happened to you in this world, and there was no other destination, no other place to go. You had good times, times of great brightening in your life. You had times of shadow and times of darkening. And everything that happened to you, you could always rest assured of the faithfulness of the world around you. You see, the amazing thing is that most of us don't actually realize how here we are. That we are completely here, you know. That the world is our home, if you like. And we never render that insight explicit. So the reason I thought of this passage that I'm reading right now, I'm not done yet, but it's because of Rilke's line here. And he says, "Here is the time for the sayable. Here is its homeland. Speak and bear witness more than ever. The things that we experience are vanishing. For what crowds them out and replaces them is an imageless act, an act under a shell which easily cracks open as soon as the business inside outgrows it. Praise this world to the angel, not the unsayable one. You can't impress him with glorious emotion. In the universe where he feels more powerfully, you are a novice. So show him something simple." And this is what John O'Donohue is doing for me. He's showing me something here about the here-ness and the things. You see, the amazing thing is that most of us don't actually realize how here we are. That we are completely here, you know. That the world is our home, if you like, and we never render that insight explicit. But it must be an amazing thing to be coming into the final time and moment of your own departing and dying. And what you'd see then when you'd look out, that you'd say, all that I'm seeing now, I'm about to take my leave of. So there is huge pathos in the imminent departure of the world. Secondly, each of us lives in our body. That's a thing we can't doubt. And everything that happened to you in your body. All your feeling, your delight, the danger, the confusion, the beauty, the questioning, the illness, the happiness, the athleticism, everything happened in your body. Your body is actually your clay house. In the world, it's where you live. And to think that at the moment of death, you're going to suffer a double loss, the loss of the world and the loss of your body. And at the same moment, you will be forced out of both worlds. This is why there is no other event in the world like death. There is no severing, no cut like death, because no matter how great a discontinuity might be in your experience, you always take up somewhere else. And there is no discontinuity that is total like. Well, mostly there isn't. In trauma, sometimes there can be. But usually there are always secret tendrils of connection and continuity, even between experiences that seem disparate and discontinuous. But death is totally different. There's no continuity when you look at it. The cut is made, and there's no continuing on. It's an amazing total kind of discontinuity. And it's very strange for that reason to try to come to terms with the disappearance of a loved one, because like a wave that withdraws in one sweep from the shoreline, the person's spirit just departs. And with the departure of the person's spirit, everything else collapses. The memory goes, the breath goes, the body goes, the thought goes. Eros, dreams, eyes, touch, they all collapse with the actual vanishing of the spirit, and nowhere else in creation does an ending take so much in one strike. If someone were to say to me, "What's the most remarkable thing you've ever heard?" I would have to say that the most remarkable thing I've ever heard was that there is death. I don't have much more to say about that, but I do have something else to read. It's a little longer. It's from George MacDonald's imagination essay. George MacDonald is a fellow Scot, as is Anselman. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, Anselman. The body is this present tabernacle. I have an ongoing project of decluttering and putting in order with a consciousness of my mortality. Yeah. I'm not going to try to say that. I wish you could. I wish you were here. You could say it so nicely. Yeah. The one thing about John O'Donohue that I could say is, first of all, he's Irish. So when he reads or talks like that, it sounds beautiful. It doesn't sound sad. It sounds hopeful, the way that he talks about it. I hope I was able to get that across in some way. And he's just being really down to earth and very honest about what death is. And he was a priest, I think, he was a Catholic priest for like 16 years. And he talks about, some of the times that he's had to do last rites for people. He says he prays the prayer. He prayed the prayers and sent the sins whistling in his Irish accent. And it was, for him, and the way that he speaks about death, it's never. I don't even know how to express it. Like, Is that what realism would sound like? Like it's never something to be afraid of. Um, it's it's an amazing thing to him. He uses the term amazing several times in that thing I read. It's amazing to him. It is amazing, actually. And that, and then just put that in the context of Jesus saying he came to trample death by death. I mean, there's just in that phrase alone, there's two different meanings to the word. One is distressing and the other is hopeful. All right. So the reason I'm going to read this George MacDonald bit, and then if nobody jumps in with me, I'm out of here after this. It was because of the 8th elegy when he talks about the animals. And I'll just see if I can find a specific spot. He says, the animal, we don't see into the open with a capital O, which is so deep in animals' faces, free from death. We only see death. And that's also, why I read the thing from John O'Donohue, because there's two sides to this story, right? The free animal has its decline in back of it forever and God in front. And when it moves already in eternity. Never, not for a single day, do we have before us that pure space into which flowers endlessly open. That pure, unseparated element which one breathes without desire and endlessly knows. This is very Barfieldian, by the way. It's very participatory and all that stuff. The child may wander there for hours. Through the timeless stillness, may get lost in it and be shaken back. Or someone dies and is it. We see in them the mere reflection of the realm of freedom which we have dimmed. He's talking about what we see in animals. The mere reflection of the realm of freedom which we have dimmed. I haven't read from Francine. I haven't read from MacDonald yet, but I'm going to. I'm reading reading the 8th elegy from Duino Elegies from Rainer Maria Rilke. And I already read it through at the beginning if you weren't with us, but I'm only reading bits of this again because I'm going to read something from George MacDonald that just popped up in my head while I was reading this elegy. If the animal moving toward us so securely in a different direction had our kind of consciousness, it would wrench us around and drag us along its path. But it feels its life as boundless, unfathomable, and without regard to its own condition, pure, like its outward gaze. And where we see the future, it sees all time and itself within all time, forever healed. Forever healed. How does a human being think of these things? That's always the thing I have to ask myself when I read stuff like this. All right, so I'm just going to read this George MacDonald bit. It's from his imagination essay, which is, and maybe I'll repost a link just as an invitation. his imagination essay, which is easily found online. It's called The Imagination, Its Function and Culture by George MacDonald. And so this is just an excerpt from it. So yeah, my last question was, how does a human being think of these things, right? These lines that Rilke has, like the bat, the bat, how does he put that? Oh, my favorite line, I already forgot it. The bat, the porcelain of the evening. The zigzagging and the porcelain of the evening, or something like that. It's not here, it's here. So the bat quivers along the porcelain of the evening, because he compares it to flying, a womb-born creature that has to fly. Actually, you know what? I have a womb-born creature that has to fly. Hang on a second, okay? So here's the womb. I've had like 8 chicks hatching in my incubator. Here's the womb-born creature that has to fly. Come here, you. Here's one. Can you see that? There's a womb-born creature that has to fly. Imagine its first flight. Right now it's clinging fairly closely to my hand. Right? Oh, baby? It has wings, but it's afraid because it just came out of this. I just want to make this graphic, okay? And like Rilke says, and how bewildered is any womb-born creature that has to fly, as if terrified and fleeing from itself. It zigzags through the air, the way a crack runs through a teacup. So the bat quivers across the porcelain of evening. Anyway, I just thought I'd make that little point. I'm going to put this guy back. All right, without further ado, I'm going to read this George MacDonald thing. So how does a poet get so close to reality, like with a big R? How does a poet do that? Here's what I think, or here's what George helped me realize. For what are the forms by means of which a man may reveal his thoughts? Are they not those of nature? But although he is created in the closest sympathy with these forms, yet even these forms are not born in his mind. What springs there is the perception that this or that form is already an expression of this or that phase of thought or feeling. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, an inexhaustible storehouse of forms, whence he may choose exponents, the crystal pitchers that shall protect his thought and not need to be broken, that the light might break forth. Example. So the bat quivers across the porcelain of evening. The meanings are in those forms already, else they could be no garment of unveiling. God has made the world that it should thus serve his creature, developing in the service that imagination whose necessity it meets. The man has but to light the lamp within the form. I'm going to read this really slowly so that you can hear it. So listen up, folks. The man has but to light the lamp within the form. And these are not Platonic forms. He's talking about the representations, anything that's created by God in the world around us. The man has but to light the lamp within the form. His imagination is the light. It is not the form. Straightway the shining thought makes the form visible, and becomes itself visible through the form. Then he gives an illustration from Shelley. I'll just read it. For some reason, the translation here just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I'll just read it anyway. An illustration of what we mean, take a passage from the poet Shelley. In his poem Adonis, written upon the death of Keats, representing death as the revealer of secrets, he says, "The one remains, the many change and pass. Heaven's light forever shines, earth's shadows fly. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity until death tramples it to fragments." Now he's just going to go into like teaching mode here about this little bit of the poem Adonis, written by Shelley. This is a new embodiment, certainly whence he who gains not for the moment at least a loftier feeling of death must be dull either of heart or of understanding. But has Shelley created this figure, or only put together its parts according to the harmony of truths already embodied in each of the parts? So he's asking, is Shelley being completely original here, or is he just taking bits and pieces of things that already exist? First, he takes the inventions of his fellow men in glass, in color, in dome. With these, he represents life as finite, though elevated, and as an analysis, although a lovely one. Next, he presents eternity as the dome of the sky above this dome of colored glass, the sky having ever been regarded as the true symbol of eternity. This portion of the figure he enriches by the attribution of whiteness, or unity and radiance. And last, he shows us death as the destroying revealer, walking aloft through the upper region, treading out this life bubble of colors, that the man may look beyond it and behold the true, the uncolored, the all-colored. But although the human imagination has no choice but to make use of the forms already prepared for it, its operation is the same as that of the divine inasmuch as it does put thought into form. And if it be to man what creation is to God, we must expect to find it operative in every sphere of human activity. Such is, indeed, the fact that to a far greater extent than is commonly supposed. The sovereignty of the imagination, for instance, over the region of poetry will hardly, in the present day at least, be questioned. But not everyone is prepared to be told that the imagination has had nearly as much to do with the making of our language as with Macbeth or the Paradise Lost. The half of our language is the work of the imagination. So he's moving now away from creativity as a result of the imagination to actually language being, the imagination being responsible for our language. For how shall two agree together what name they shall give to a thought or a feeling? How shall the one show the other that which is invisible? This is what Rilke talked about too, right? He talked about the invisible world and how it wanted to be born in us and made meaningful through us. True, he can unveil the mind's construction in the face, that living, eternally changeful symbol which God has hung in front of the unseen spirit. But that without words reaches only to the expression of present feeling. To attempt to employ it alone, your face, your gestures, if you want to try to communicate with someone, you can't just use your face or your gestures. He says it would constantly mislead. While the expression of feeling itself would be misinterpreted, especially with regard to cause and object. The dumb show would be worse than dumb. So that's just if you were just doing, gestures and facial expressions. But let a man become aware of some new movement within him. Loneliness comes with it, for he would share his mind with his friend, and he cannot. He is shut up in speechlessness. Gazing about him in pain, he suddenly beholds the material form of his immaterial condition. There stands his thought. So this is exactly what Rilke is talking about in, I don't remember which one it was. Maybe it's the last one, eh? Earth, isn't this what you want to arise within us, invisible? Isn't it your dream to be wholly invisible someday? O Earth, invisible. It says here above that, he says, when he's talking about how you should show the angel how happy a thing can be, how innocent in ours, how even lamenting grief purely decides to take form, serves as a thing or dies into a thing, and blissfully escapes far beyond the violin. And these things which live by perishing, know you are praising them, transient, they look to us for deliverance, us the most transient of all. They want us to change them utterly in our invisible heart, within, oh, endlessly within us, whoever we may be at last. Okay, so now I'll read on here. Gazing about him in pain, he suddenly beholds the material form of his immaterial condition. There stands his thought. God thought it before him and put its picture there ready for him when he wanted it. Or to express the thing more prosaically, the man cannot look around him long without perceiving some form, aspect, or movement of nature, some relation between its forms, or between such and himself, which resembles the state or motion within him. This he seizes as the symbol, as the garment or body of his invisible thought, presents it to his friend, and his friend understands him. Every word so employed with a new meaning is henceforth in its character born of the spirit and not of the flesh. I'll say that again. Born of the spirit and not of the flesh. Born of the imagination and not of the understanding, and is henceforth submitted to new laws of growth and modification. Carlyle says, in Past and Present, thinkest thou there were no poets till Dan Chaucer? No heart burning with a thought which it could not hold, and had no word for, and needed to shape and coin a word for, what thou callest a metaphor, trope, or the like? For every word we have, there was such a man and poet. The coldest word was once a glowing new metaphor, and bold, questionable originality. Thy very attention, does it not mean an attentio, a stretching to? Fancy that act of the mind, which all were conscious of, which none had yet named, when this new poet first felt bound and driven to name it. His questionable originality and new glowing metaphor was found adoptable, intelligible, and remains our name for it to this day. All words, then, belonging to the inner world of the mind are of the imagination, are originally poetic words. The better, however, any such word is fitted for the needs of humanity, the sooner it loses its poetic aspect by commonness of use. It ceases to be heard as a symbol and appears only as a sign. Thus, thousands of words, which were originally poetic words owing their existence to the imagination, lose their vitality and harden into mummies of prose. Not merely in literature does poetry come first and prose afterwards, but poetry is the source of all the language that belongs to the inner world, whether it be of passion or of metaphysics, of psychology or of aspiration. No poetry comes by the elevation of prose, but the half of prose comes by the massing into the common clay of thousands of winged words. Whence, like the lovely shell of bygone ages, one is occasionally disinterred by some lover of speech and held up to the light to show the play of color in its manifold laminations. For the world is the human being turned inside out. All that moves in the mind is symbolized in nature. Or to use another more philosophical and certainly not less poetic figure, the world is a sensuous analysis of humanity, and hence an inexhaustible wardrobe for the clothing of human thought. That was George MacDonald from the Imagination, Its Function and Culture essay. So, and I have been rambling on for an hour and a half here. So, I don't know if I want to add anything to anything that I just read. I just hope that it lands for certain people, and maybe people will understand why I wanted to read the things I read in connection to the elegies. They were just things that kept popping up in my mind as I was reading them. And yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say. So I'm going to leave people a few minutes. If anybody wants to jump in with me, that would be great. I'm not going to run off. If somebody wants to talk about anything that I talked about, or anything at all for that matter. Mm-hmm. Hi, Nico. Yeah, we do. Yeah, it was kind of a spontaneous thing. I mean, I did schedule it for a few minutes, like 45 minutes beforehand, just so people could see it. But I don't know. I was just reading the Duino Elegies again, and all these things were popping up in my mind, and I thought, what the heck? I'll just ramble on girl country for a little while, share it with everyone. I can highly recommend John O'Donohue. He's unfortunately not as well known as he should be. I think he's well known in certain circles. Are you familiar with him, Anselman, if you're still watching? He's passed now, but he's got a great book on Audible, and I recommend it because he actually reads it, and he has the most wonderful Irish accent. And it's just an incredible meditation. Like, it's called Beauty. Anyway, if you look up John O'Donohue Beauty, you'll find it. Oh, you've never heard of him, Anselin? I think you'd love him. He's also a poet. He has a few talks on YouTube, but they're older because he's been gone for a while. Sure, Aaron. Sounds good. I put a link just above there. And he's just very poetic in the way that he thinks about things and talks about them. So they're always really kind of meditative. I do that with the beauty book. I just listen to it because, yeah, it's just full of stuff. And I know a lot of people criticize Rilke. Rilke had wasn't the most moral kind of guy, if you're into morality. But again, I'm not sure anyone really is. All modern in Spanish, Nico? That's terrible. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I saw the tail end of your stream.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about with George MacDonald, but I really wanted to read more of them.
Yeah, you should. There's a lot to read.
Lilith, which was pretty interesting, just kind of confusing.
Lilith is a bit of a deep dive, like, into MacDonald. There are, I mean, MacDonald's work is, the first time I came across MacDonald, I was 26.
Yeah.
And I tried reading At the Back of the North Wind, and I thought, who is this guy? He's on mushrooms or something. I just thought he was crazy. And everyone was like, "Oh, he's a Christian," but they didn't really know much about him, you
Yeah.
know. And I'm like, when was he born? Like it was just, I couldn't really fit him into any categories, and I just slipped the book back on my shelf. I still have the book,
Yeah.
and I just never, I wasn't afraid of it or anything, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I got into his unspoken sermons, which I think is actually probably the best gateway into MacDonald for
Yeah.
Protestants, because I think most Protestants are, I'm not saying all, but most Protestants can relate more to that sermon kind of writing
Yeah.
where it's very propositional. And unless you're just a fairy tale aficionado, or a mythology geek,
Yeah.
George MacDonald's going to come across as being a little weird.
He is. I mean, because in the beginning of Lilith, it kind of reminds me of like Narnia, because he goes through a window or like a mirror to another world with like a
Mhm.
little raven bird.
Mhm.
But beyond that, it was like a very, I mean, it was very more called like Lovecraft.
Oh yeah.
But
Well,
since he's a Christian,
it's funny because like all of them, like Lewis,
yeah,
Lewis said that it was Phantastes, which is another book, which is kind of the forerunner to Lilith.
yeah,
Lilith he wrote at the end of his life, and Phantastes he wrote fairly early, and you could see that he's working out a story. He's working out Lilith like for a long while
yeah.
in his stories, but um, C.S. Lewis writes that Phantastes baptized his imagination.
Wow,
Those are his words. And then
yeah,
Lewis has an anthology of his favorite quotes from all of George MacDonald's works.
right,
And in that anthology, in the preface, he says that there is nothing that he was that MacDonald was his master, and that there's nothing that he didn't include. Nothing that he wrote didn't have something of MacDonald in it, whether it was a quote or an idea or whatever.
yeah.
And so that, yeah, you would be reminded of Narnia. And I'm not familiar with Lovecraft personally. I've heard about him, but I haven't read any of his work.
Well, he's a good writer. He's not a Christian,
Mhm.
and a lot of his writings is based off of I guess the place and time that he was in and how the world was kind of changing around him. And he used that to like describe aliens and like this cosmic horror, which is like, because he's not a Christian, so he's like uh, thinking that the truth of the world is actually very dark, and there are greater principalities that are beyond us. But his fiction reads more like a scary story, pretty much like a haunted
Yeah,
house.
I've heard. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I contrast it to just because George MacDonald does, but when I heard he was a Christian, it's like it doesn't
It's
have
hard to.
that. Yeah, it's like dark romantic, but still Christian. So he's not going to say like the world is inherently evil or the principality or like these spirits beyond us are out to get us or anything, which
It's
is
funny
fascinating.
because in Lilith, when Mr. Vane goes out with the Raven and he
Yeah,
and he gets into that new world, he wants to go home because everything is just so strange to him. He can't, he's feeling. And how does McDonald put? They have a conversation about that, and the Raven says something like, "Home is where you can go in and out of." But he does a lot of flipping of what out means and what in means, and like, so what I find with McDonald is he's constantly challenging our very ossified way of thinking of things. He's trying to turn us upside down a little bit
okay,
and help us to see the world from a different perspective. So there's lots of examples in Lilith where you know, he has this book and he, through the book flies. I think Mr. Vane's carrying it. I can't remember now because it's been a while since I read Lilith, but somehow
Yeah.
the book ends up in the air, and then when it falls to the ground, it turns to an earthworm, and then Mr. Raven picks it up and eats it. Right?
Yeah.
But like, this is the incarnational word.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like the most accessible example of something like that you could imagine. But we go, oh, that's creepy. What the hell? He just ate his book, you know?
Yeah.
The book turned into a worm. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And we get all, yeah. So
I did.
yeah. I totally understand, But what's interesting is, like, if you read the unspoken sermons,
Mhm.
and then you start reading his fiction, and he didn't write the sermons before he wrote the fiction. It was the other way around. And they're unspoken because he got fired as a, like, he was a minister in the
Pentecostal?
no, he was a Scottish Calvinist.
Mm.
Anyway, he didn't last long, and
Yeah.
they fired. Well, they didn't fire him. They actually just reduced his salary to almost nothing, and he couldn't support his family on it. So they made him leave.
That's crazy.
And so when he wrote the unspoken sermons, they were literally unspoken because he didn't get to.
He didn't preach it.
Oh my God, Anselman, that's perfect. I never even thought of that. See, this is the beauty of George. The original bookworm, hello. And Mr. Raven is a librarian.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's the I'm not sure, Anselman. It's not Presbyterian, but it's like the Scottish version of that.
Methodist, maybe?
No.
Because I know he's a Universalist.
It's kind of the state church in Scotland, but
oh, okay.
Maybe it is congregational. I don't know the name of it. But he wasn't there long. He also had a master's degree in physics and chemistry.
Yeah.
Like, he was a very smart guy. He was, But the reason I was reading from George MacDonald was because I actually read some of Rilke's poetry from the Duino Elegies.
Okay.
And I just had images. Like, I had George MacDonald running through my head and some other things. And so I read the elegies, and then I read the excerpts that came to my mind while I was reading the elegies, and that's really all I was doing.
That's cool. Do you do you like the fantastical stuff, like fantasy or fairy tales?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. Yep.
Because I think I like Narnia, but I think The Lord of the Rings is my favorite series.
Yeah. And Tolkien and Lewis fought a little bit about what Narnia was. Yeah.
Well, I only know a little bit about that. What did they fight about?
Allegory. Yeah. Tolkien accused him of writing an allegory, and apparently Lewis disagreed that it was allegorical. So, and it's funny because in one of George MacDonald's essays, he basically says that his fairy tales are not allegories, that you have to be a master to write an allegory because most people tire of them.
Yeah.
And so he has a line in the Fantastic Imagination essay about allegory. I always get an image of the Inklings poring over George MacDonald's essays and then his novels, and because he was basically the originator of fantasy fiction, right?
Yeah, he's the guy.
And they were just probably deciding on their, I don't know. I like to imagine Tolkien and Lewis arguing about what George MacDonald was saying about allegory, because I don't think George MacDonald completely shut out allegory. I think he
Right.
gave a challenge to any writers, any would-be writers, that if they were going to do an allegory, they were going to have to really do it well, because otherwise they'd lose their audience, right? Okay, thanks, Anselman. It's great.
Well, let me ask you this: Do you think C.S. Lewis was successful in that with Narnia?
You know, I think
I
he
think it's
was.
underrated.
I think he was. Yeah, I think it's underrated too. And the more I know about George MacDonald, the more I see what C.S. Lewis was doing.
Yeah.
So, and he's doing it in the same way MacDonald does it, just underhandedly, like not in a bad way, but just like secretly
Yeah.
and quietly and unobtrusively. So yeah, I think there's more to it than what meets the eye, let's say.
Yeah. Because I know that it gets a lot of flack for that, but if you come from C.S. Lewis' background of being an atheist and then a Christian, it makes sense. The first thing he kind of writes about in his second book or first book is representation of Jesus, and I can see where Tolkien kind of would get crossed with that. But even Tolkien, I think, probably could have gone a little further and more metaphysical questions, because I've been obsessing over his unfinished work. Have you ever heard of this?
No. Well, it depends which one. Like, is it called The Unfinished Work, or what's it called?
There's a book called Unfinished Tales that are
Oh, okay.
basically, Silmarillion daydreams of like what he could have
Right,
added.
right, right.
But he actually has an unfinished sequel, maybe a chapter long, of a new book after Lord of the Rings called
Oh.
The New Shadow.
Ooh, too bad, eh?
And yeah, and if you kind of juxtaposing, for example, Michael Santori's Boomer books. This is a little, Boomer,
Boomerality? I still don't know what
yeah,
that is.
Boomerality.
I don't even wanna know. So I haven't
But
grappled with it.
but
I'm
he,
just like,
it's kind
"La,
of
la, la,
like,
la."
I imagine, the ethics of the world changing after World War II, and I think Tolkien is kind of accepted because he's a guy that wrote after World War II, but has a mind of like what would be, good ideas coming from after World War II. If you think of like the orcs of being, fascists or something, but
Yeah, well,
he stops.
they were also present for World War One, I think,
Yeah,
too, right? And I know that Lewis was very greatly affected by the First World War. He actually has a
yeah,
book of poetry that I have, that way back in the first, like, in the very birth pangs of Randos United, Jeff and
yeah,
I started going through that poetry.
yeah.
Oh,
And so,
look at this.
um,
Apparently, he gave up writing the sequel because the elves were gone and he thought the world was thus uninteresting. But the plot was going to be that boys in Gondor got bored and dressed up as orcs. Oh,
and that's why it's so
really?
important, because
Yeah.
I feel
That would
like,
be the modern version.
yeah, because you can kind of see where George R. R. Martin kind of comes with his writings, but I wish someone like him would have just at least attempted kind of this new world of ethics and its problems and its successes. But for Tolkien, I can understand why he kind of wanted to let things go.
Mm.
Like it was too dark and he didn't want to participate. And his last fiction, and I apologize for talking too much,
No, it's fine. It's good.
was called Wooten Major. Have you ever read
I
his
I have
short?
that one, but I have never read
Yeah.
it.
And so
Yeah.
if I ever wrote fan fiction, it would be uh, a juxtaposition of that dark sequel or the New Shadow with Wooten Major, with the
I
pet.
have to read that one. Is it good?
It's really good. I
Okay.
like it.
Yeah.
I think that there's some good ideas in there.
Okay.
But
I just wanted to read this from Anselman. I was baptized in a church originating in a breakaway move From the Congregational Church in 19th century. I wonder if MacDonald knew of that church that rejected. He probably did. He probably did, Anselman. I've got a series of sermons from a book that he wrote, like a collection that he wrote called A Dish of Orts. That's actually where the first essay was published, the imagination essay. And I mean, they're not all sermons. They're just essays. And one of them was a sermon. I read it on Girl Country, actually. It was a sermon that he preached in a Unitarian church.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. If you want to hear it, you can I just read it on Grail Country. I think I've got it labeled.
Okay, I'll look into that.
George MacDonald Unitarian sermon or whatever. It's good.
Okay.
So I'm sure he was aware of that. Anselman, or I don't know when. Yeah, okay, 19th century. Yeah. But George MacDonald turned his face away from Calvinism pretty hard. Apparently, his mother died when he was young, and his grandmother was a strict Calvinist woman. So he doesn't have a good taste of that in his mouth. Yeah.
Sherry, are you Orthodox? Is that?
I am. Yeah.
Orthodox? That's cool.
Not very long and not very active in a parish because I don't live near a church. So I feel like a very baby Orthodox Christian, to be honest. But
that's okay.
I'm baptized.
That's cool.
I got in.
You got in. You can take the Eucharist.
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to go to one, but never got the. We have like a tiny one here in Midland, and I got to the parking lot, and I was like, I can't.
Yeah, it feels. You know what? The one that I attended for the first time, I brought someone with me because I was too shy to go by myself, and was my niece actually, and it was a mission. So like we were already in their parking lot and they hadn't even arrived yet. And then they had to pull their sign out and set up all their icons, and it was in a Catholic rec hall. Wow. Actually, my niece went before me because she had to, and this was a city 5 hours away. We had to drive 5 hours one way just to get there. And, but she had been in that city for some reason. Oh, I know. Her mother-in-law was dying in the hospital there. And she reached out to an Orthodox priest. She looked for an Orthodox church. She's not Orthodox, but she was just very interested at the time. And she reached out to an Orthodox church in the city where she was, the small town, the small city.
Yeah.
And they directed her to a priest who visited. He was from Vancouver. Anyway, until she ended up finding out about this church, and her first visit to that church, she went to the Catholic parish instead of the Catholic rec hall, which was right next door in the parking lot. She thought, so she went, she brought her 3 kids and her husband, and they're sitting in this Catholic mass, and the whole time she's thinking, is this Orthodox? Like, this is just, because she'd only ever seen stuff online. She could do it. She had no clue. And then at one point, I don't know what clued her in, but at one point she looked at her husband. She goes, "This is a Catholic church." And he goes, "Yeah." Because he was her husband's First Nations, and most of the parishes and First Nations on reserves here were Catholic, right? So he's very familiar. Anyway, so her first experience in the Orthodox Church was in a Catholic mass.
Well, I'm surprised a Catholic church would host an Orthodox.
Well, yeah, well, I think it's a good thing, don't you?
Yeah.
That both parties would be willing. It was the mission, so it was started by a group of people who are in their 90s now.
Wow.
They were 30 years ago. They started doing reader services in people's homes,
Oh, that's
And
nice.
they just got an actual space like of their own now, like just like 2 months ago. I haven't even seen it yet. But that was my first liturgy, was going to that mission. And it was funny because when we got there, these people were outside setting up their little sign, and they were like, we walked up to them and they go, "Are you coming to us?" And we're like, "Yeah, we hope so." And they were like, "Really?" They couldn't believe it. It was really sweet.
Yeah, that sounds
Hi,
cool.
Nick. Nico,
Hey,
how
I
are
thought
you?
fantasy is one of my favorite topics, so I'm jumping in.
Cool.
Although I missed the first hour, so sorry about that.
Well, the first hour is Duino Elegies, poetry, which is like the highest form of fantasy, in my opinion. But that's my opinion.
I've been listening to a bunch of that. There's that poet Malcolm Guy, was it?
Oh, Malcolm Guy. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
There's a lot of good stuff, but I'm Spanish, so
Mhm.
I've been trying to find some of more of my stuff, but it's like super modern over here. It's modern.
Yeah. Oh, Pablo Neruda.
Uh,
He's Argentinian, I think,
Oh,
or
is he?
Chilean.
But
Yeah,
he's Spanish speaking.
yeah, he's Spanish speaking.
I'm not all that familiar what came out of Spain. I mean, Spain had a pretty rich medieval history. There might, but I don't know if you want to be reading that kind of poetry.
yeah, those are the things I got.
You got
The
them. Viejo, yeah,
romances. Uh,
old romance or the like romantic period in Spain.
well, romance it just means poetry, so it's late medieval basically.
Yeah, poetry. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
and there's also the poem of my Cid, which basically it's an Arab word for Lord. So it's the
Lord.
poem of my Lord,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's it. That's all you found so far.
yeah, that's it. That's it. I didn't want anything modern.
Yeah, I know, right? Although there are some good modern poets, but I think you're right. I saw your comment that English has such a rich backlog
Yeah,
of, yeah. Let me
yeah.
see. I'm just curious now. I want to look something.
Of your McDonald's and all of that, because they are closer to us in time. So
Yeah.
but they are drawing from a very rich tradition, and over here in Latin America is a big place, and there was a lot of poetry, a lot, but it's just modern.
Okay, so I've got a small list. Some of the most famous Spanish romantic poets are Gustavo Adolfo. I don't know how to say it. Bequer, Becquer,
Becker.
and then okay, and then Jose de Espronceda and Rosalia de Castro and Carolina Coronado.
That pronunciation is pretty good.
Oh, I used to be good at Spanish. I've had quite a few Spanish guests at my house too. Okay, and then there's Spanish metaphysical poet Jose Angel Valente. I don't know how new he is. I'm just looking on the internet. I don't know anything about these people.
Angel. Okay.
Oh yeah, okay. So then there's a there's an article here from Universidad de la Laguna in Spain. The reception of T.S. Eliot in Spain, and they mentioned the Angel Valente and Andres Sanchez Robeña and Antonio Colinas.
And Antonio Colinas.
I don't know if those guys are poets or if they're the authors of the paper, but there's a bunch of names anyway. That might get you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think it will. I have to check if they are traditional or not.
Oh, here goes Cervantes and St. John of the Cross for Spanish literature and poetry from Hanselman.
Yeah.
Is St. John of the Cross Spanish? Was he Spanish?
Cervantes, yes.
No, St. John of the Cross.
Oh.
Was he Spanish? I've only ever...
San Juan de la Cruz, yeah.
Okay. It's not the same guy. I'm just kidding. Saint Juan de la Cruz.
A Carmelita friar.
From Spain?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, he's amazing.
From
I didn't know he was
1500s.
Spanish. Yes, Anselman says yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but though Cervantes is pretty well known, but I find it he's too modern.
Too modern.
Yeah, and he some people would even think that he's postmodern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I just looked under the romantic and metaphysical poets in Spain because that's a nice era, and it's also a great what's the word, like, worldview, in my opinion. You know, I think the poetry would be great.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, all of the intersection with Tolkien poetry and fantasy. Some time ago, I got very into the subject,
Mm-hmm.
and I tried to make some kind of fiction of my own. But since I'm not a writer, I decided the best way to learn would be to study a particular work instead of studying, abstractions about
Right.
writing. So one of the works was the work of Tolkien, and there's a lot of interesting stuff, and like around 300 hours of videos on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
But the most interesting thing is the idea he had for a mythology for England.
Right.
At the start, I couldn't quite get what he was going for, but essentially it was something like, what was the name of that Finnish mythology?
Oh, the yeah, I know it. Not the Ada, but
No, not the Ada. There's an epic poem.
yeah. I looked it up once because my grandmother was Finnish and I wanted to read it.
What is the name?
Finnish epic poem.
Kalevala.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that's it. So he wanted one of those, but for England. And he had his reasons for not liking the Arthurian cycle, or maybe rather he wanted more than that. But
He
what's
didn't like the Grail stories, and he didn't like Beowulf. Well, Beowulf is Scandinavian, right?
yeah,
Um,
well, apparently I can't confirm this, but apparently it's Norman, the the Arthur myth.
oh,
Um,
Norman. Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
and apparently at some point the I guess people of the um, Anglo-Saxon descent lost
Mhm.
their own myths. So the ones that Tolkien made were supposed to be
Interesting.
a replacement for the ones that were lost.
Okay.
Um, and he thought that the the preser- the language came the place where the language lived was in the poetry. That it was important that the poetry was in English. Um, so the made up languages were not so much for that purpose. That seems to be more like something that he liked to do for its own sake or for
Mhm,
his own
mhm.
enjoyment. But it's the poetry in English that's the point.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that all of them, like Barfield, Lewis, I don't know much about Charles Williams and Tolkien. They all kind of fell heavily onto Coleridge's literaria too. Coleridge wrote um, about the imagination, um, and I mean they were all very well versed in myth and everything too. But as far as like what it was they were actually doing, they refer often to Coleridge. And I know Malcolm Guite has talked about if you want to understand um, any of them and George MacDonald, you have to understand Coleridge because they're all kind of deriving out of Coleridge's thinking.
I didn't know about that. I knew about McDonald, but
Yeah. Well, because it's they're all inoculating each other, okay? So Coleridge inoculates MacDonald, who inoculates all the Inklings, you know. And I always get I personally, and I'm not a scholar on the Inklings or anything like that, but I always get this image of the Inklings getting together over George MacDonald's work and all pointing at different aspects of the work that are what they would deem as the most important.
hmm,
And then that causing like an explosion, right? Which sends shards of things out into the universe. And then we get Barfield doing his thing. We get Williams doing his thing. We get Lewis doing his thing over here and Tolkien over here. But they all kind of are moving out of that center point
hmm,
from from because they all want to create this canceling
what?
wax lyrical about food preparation, the rhyme of the ancient marinade. He wrote a poem called The Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Um, but that's just in my own imagination, Nick. That's not something that, I could verify. But that's what it feels like to me because like Barfield went into the whole poetic linguistic aspects of what language is actually doing, which is what I read there in my little George MacDonald excerpt in the thing. And Tolkien goes off on this journey to make the perfect, non-allegorical fairy tale, right? Which is what George MacDonald talks about in one of his other essays, and so on, right? So it just feels like
Yeah,
that to me.
and as I got into the work of Tolkien, I tried to figure out how it worked, And I have this personal theory of the place it is supposed to play.
Mm.
Uh, people talk about the fantasy this and fantasy that. I would put not exactly the Lord of the Rings, more the stories on the Silmarillion as myths or a fiction in the genre of myth or the epic tale or the saga. Um, so I wouldn't uh, leave it in the library right beside something like, I don't know. Um, I wouldn't leave it near Narnia or Harry Potter. I would put it right besides the Iliad or the sagas. That's where I would put it. And the Lord of the Rings, it's a novel, but the underneath symbolism, it's mythological.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a shame it's not a poem that can be sung, um, because the shape of the novel, I think, gets in the way of symbolical thinking.
You mean
Um,
Tolkien? You're talking about Lord of the Rings or what?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The Lord of the Rings is a myth that is dressed up as a novel.
Right.
So in the surface, it's a novel, and below the surface, it's a myth, like the Iliad, something like that. Um,
I haven't really understood yet because I have no education in these things. I'm just learning as I go. But I haven't really understood um, what makes a fairy tale a fairy tale. I just know that George MacDonald's story, The Golden Key, has been deemed a fairy tale. Like it qualifies as a modern fairy tale, and apparently, modern fairy tales are almost non-existent.
mm,
It's like we lost the ability to do fairy tale.
yeah,
Don't ask me what that what that means because I don't
yeah,
know yet. But I do know that as far as many people are concerned, many scholars, that the Golden Key rates as a modern fairy tale. And C.S. Lewis says, George MacDonald didn't have the greatest, let's say, skill as a writer, but what he excelled at was poetic writing. And
mm,
so he he really challenged. I think he really challenged these people, like the Inklings, on, and I think they picked up their crosses, right? And tried to follow, which we're all very grateful for, right? Like
mm.
if people could write fairy tales again, that would be a major change in our consciousness, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the
Let
reason
me.
I don't know what a fairy tale is because I'm not living in, you know, medieval times, right?
Yeah,
No, I don't know. I've lost my connection to what it is. And so if someone explains it to me, I still can't understand that. I could maybe list out all the technical reasons why something is or isn't a fairy tale, but that doesn't mean I understand it. So, yeah.
and there is an interesting thing about that. I also don't know what a fairy tale really is, and if when I look at it, um, I find that fairy tales are not very similar to the stories in the Lord of the Rings or the other ones in the Silmarillion. I don't find them to be similar. Many times in a fairy tale, you have very stereotypical characters like an evil king or an evil stepmother,
Mhm, mhm,
and
mhm. Yeah,
that's kind of
yeah.
not the kind of thing that Tolkien makes.
Mm-mm.
Um, and he brought that on fairy stories. So apparently, he was trying to make something like that, but I find it that his story is much more similar to what's on the Iliad rather than
Yeah, or
the White.
Beowulf, or
Yeah,
Beowulf.
yeah,
It's more
yeah.
like you said, like an epic poem of.
Yeah,
It's like, and to me, those. I mean, and I'm just like, I'm so not knowledgeable in this area, but I'm just going on my own intuition. But to me, those things are like, it's like preserved history, ancestral, and it's not just history, but it's like ideas, and it's like some way they, through story, they were able to preserve the consciousness congress of all their ancestors, right?
yeah. And
So yeah.
and also a lot of things like words, themes, moods,
Mhm.
geography, the weather, customs,
Yeah.
um, um, cultural technologies. Like if you find yourself alone in a foreign land, how do you engage that? Do you stay
Mhm.
hidden? Do you show yourself? There are little instructions in stories like that.
Yeah.
Uh, and a bunch of more stuff. That's why in the Tolkien story, the geography is like everything is slammed to the west because it's supposed to have the feeling of England or the
Right.
British Isles that
Yeah,
are.
I'm just wondering how much of Blake Tolkien liked, because Tolkien also I mean, Blake also had a dream of a mythology for England, right? Like that's what his Jerusalem poem is about, and but he many of his poems, like he has one yeah, he kind of he Blake does this really interesting thing of with like the new heaven and the new earth being actually England. But it's not, for Blake it's his homeland. It's not some kind of Christian nationalism, you know. But if Blake had been Spanish, it would have been Spain, you know? And I think for him he would see those things as being like the new earth would be possible for every culture and every country, right? But Blake was
Yeah.
English, and so I'm just wondering, like, if Tolkien got that idea, or not the idea, but he's maybe carrying the burden that Blake had for England, you know?
Um, if you read the Greek myths, they happened over there. If you're
Mhm.
a Greek now and you read the myths, they talk about Mount Olympus. You know
Right.
where Mount Olympus is. You can see Mount Olympus. So you are inside the
Right, right.
stories.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
It becomes kind of hard when all of the stories take place somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's like it's a set of stairs,
I find that
and
interesting though, that Tolkien would have that feeling because I mean, I don't know. Anselman, you should know this if you could stop speaking Spanish with William for a minute. um, it just keeps coming down to cafe au lait.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
It's the French. It's French, Cafe au lait is milk. In German, they say milk coffee. Anyways, Anselman, isn't there loads of mythology from the British Isles? Like,
And
like
from the
what is
Nordics,
missing
and
for Tolkien? Like just the Anglo-Saxon mythology?
yeah, that's the one thing I was gonna say. There's so much in the northern traditions. I was looking for that stuff in Spanish, and what I found out is that essentially there's nothing. There's and essentially what happens in Spanish is that we have one epic story that takes place in Spain. That it's the poem of
Yeah.
the Lord, but it doesn't have anything supernatural. And the uh,
Uh-huh.
the main character, he has a full name. He was a real person that really lived. We know where he was. It's not like King Arthur that
No.
you don't know where he's mythological.
If he was real or not.
Yeah. So basically, what we do is that the older mythology we just steal from the Greeks.
Yeah.
That's what we just steal from the Greeks, and we use all of their myths.
Well, does it have something to do with the ability to write stuff down? Like again, this is my lack of education, but I mean, where the Greeks were probably more able to preserve writings before the simpler folk in the UK, right? Who were living on the land. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's that, because the people who lived in the Iberian Peninsula, they had their myths. It's more those were lost. Those because there were a lot of people who came into Spain. Um, uh, a lot of Germans, for example, Gauls, Romans.
Oh,
Um,
everywhere in
uh,
Europe.
yeah, and
You know what? I'm actually rewatching The Last Kingdom right now.
oh,
I'm watching it. I watched the series when it came out, but I don't know when that was. At least 6 or 7 years ago now. So, and I just have such a hard time finding anything on Netflix that's interesting to me. So I'm just rewatching it because I love it. I love the history, and it's all about England, right? It's like it's about Alfred the Great and the formation, his dream to make a unified England. And so you've got the Anglo Saxons, and you've got the Britons, and you've got the Danes, you know,
yeah.
and all these little kingdoms everywhere. And I mean, my husband is Swiss, and Switzerland was just like ridiculous. Like, first of all, none of them could get along with each other. They still can't, actually. And I mean, that's actually not unusual for most of Europe. Like, even in Spain, I have a friend from Mallorca. Don't even talk to him about Spanish people. Like, those are the scum of the earth, right? Like, he just, and he speaks Mallorcan, and that's it. And he wants to be he's a separatist and all,
Yeah,
like all this
because
tribalism, kingdom building is still going on. It's just really
yeah.
hasn't gone away.
Because in the beginning, in Spain, it was all a bunch of tribes, and each one of them had their own language. And then later on, Spanish came in, and people had to learn Spanish and forget their language.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a big sore spot.
but regarding what you said, I think it's the contrary. That when you don't have writing, that's the key. Because this Sid guy could easily have become a Arthur figure, but there are too much information about where he was, his full name, his. There are even documents. There's too much. There's not enough space for the
Okay.
mystery. That's one thing I realized.
That's
The,
interesting.
the world of the fairy tale lives on the places that you've never seen and can only imagine. So the more and more we know about the world, the less space is
The
there for
smaller it gets.
the kingdom of the elves. So
Mhm.
the elves used to be these giants that live somewhere that you've never
Beautiful.
seen,
That's good. I like that. Yeah.
because you don't know what's over there. Uh,
Mhm.
you don't have a really good map that
Right.
reaches really far away, and then they became tinier and tinier as the less space there was for the imagination.
Beautiful.
That's
That's really good, Nico. I like that.
when when I was a kid, a really small toddler, and my parents used to take me from one place to another, and I got to know a bit of the neighborhood. I remember there was a house that I always imagined what was at the other side of the wall.
Mhm.
You could see something. There
Mhm.
was like a tree over there, but I always imagine something different each time I passed, and uh, some kind of magical creature. And
Right.
as I grew older, I stopped doing that because it just became more real and tangible in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. That's normal. That's when as you get older, your imagination goes away. It's a sad day. It's like, you know, should have a little funeral on that day for our imagination. My daughter actually marked it. She actually made the announcement. She was very upset about it because she tried to play with her dinosaurs up at the creek and she couldn't because she didn't have the imagination was gone. And it was from that experience because I talked to her about it. She had to process it. She came in the house with her bag of dinosaurs and plunked it on the table. And she's like, I lost my imagination. It's very sad. And I thought, what happened was all before that, like, because she would play with her dinosaurs, right? And they would do things and they would eat grass and they would attack each other, whatever they did. And her hands were like invisible. She couldn't see her hands. Right? The dinosaurs were for real. They were all doing this. And as the imagination started fading away, she became more and more aware of her hands,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
So it's like this fall into self-consciousness.
Hmm.
And yeah.
That's one thing I remember as I read for the 50th time the on fairy stories essay. I couldn't understand this thing about the land of fairy,
Mhm.
and finally I got it that essentially the place where the elves live is a similar place where falling in love is.
Mhm.
Or if it's not right there, it's like right beside it. There's
Right,
the
right.
land of falling in love, and then
That's
there's the
right.
land of fairy.
Mhm.
Um, that's when I got the the difference.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like a mood, a way of the mind, or something like that.
what it is it's beauty. It's beauty opens the door to enchantment. And that you see that in Dante, for example, with Beatrice, and you see it in George MacDonald's Hidden Life poem, where the girl falls off the horse and the guy, fixes her saddle and plunks her back in there, and she's gone forever. Like it's just a momentary glimpse at beauty, and as soon as that happens, and that's falling in love, right? Like that's what happens to Dante, and that's what happens to the guy in the poem, and it's also what happened to many other poets and philosophers, actually, in real life. And it was a unrequited. Is that what you call it? Unrequited love, when they can't reciprocate, like for whatever reasons. Kierkegaard comes to mind. He's just not. He decides against it. He's going to withhold that from himself so that he can actually move into the pain of it, because he was finding some kind of philosophical fullness. Um, but what it does is it opens the door to enchantment.
Hmm.
So, right? And that's then you could meditate. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go, Nico, but we should do this again because I love this conversation, actually.
Yeah.
You could meditate on beauty, truth, and goodness from that perspective, right? Like what you just said about the land of fairies and love being right next to each other, right?
Hmm.
Falling in love. Because and George MacDonald really, really portrays this well in Fantasties, actually, in the book Fantasties that he wrote. Um, so yeah, beauty draws you in, right? It draws you in to truth and goodness. And was it uh, Urs von Balthasar said, Hans Urs von Balthasar, he was a Catholic theologian. He had this phrase that I just love. Beauty is the constellation that dances around truth and goodness and doesn't need to be noticed. It doesn't ask to be noticed. So what it does is it actually captures you. It catches your eye. It's something that it's a surprise, right? And that's what happens to, I know in the George MacDonald poem for sure, where he's just going out to work in the fields to plow the fields, and all of a sudden this girl comes out of nowhere and falls off her horse, and it's all sudden and unforeseen, and it changes his whole life, right? We've all had our Beatrices, have we? There we go. Yeah. So unfortunately I'm going to have to go though, Nico, but I think we should actually do, I've wanted to go through On Fairy Stories by Tolkien for some time as an essay. So if you'd be interested in that, we could do that together, and maybe somebody else would like to join us.
Yeah, sure.
Like, I don't usually hurry through those things, just so you know. Like I go like I read.
I've seen a few streams.
There you go. So like I read a paragraph or two and then talk about it, kind of thing. And I think it would be fun if that's really a passion of yours and you're familiar with the work, because I'm not. I think that'd be great to do together.
Yeah. I read a lot of into Tolkien. I haven't read so much on McDonald's and all.
That's okay. I haven't read much of Tolkien. I've read Lord of the Rings, the whole thing, and I've read parts of the Silmarillion, mostly the beginning. And I have Wooten Major actually here that I could read. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't know George MacDonald. I would just like to go through Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, because I'll be able to spot George MacDonald in that essay if he's existing in there somewhere. I'll find him.
Right.
And so yeah, first of all, are you on Discord? You're on Discord, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the limits of my technological skills. I don't even know how to friend request someone on Discord. So if you could do that, and then we could message and we could set up some times or something.
Yeah, sure.
Because I know you're in Spain. So
I'm in South America.
Oh, you're in South America. Oh, that's even better. Well, that's better.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the time difference between? Are you on the Pacific coast?
Yes, I think I'm. It's more East Coast where I'm at.
Oh, you're more East Coast.
I'm
Pacific time.
Okay.
I'm Vancouver time.
That's why, right? It's nighttime here. There's so much light behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's GMT -3.
Whatever that means. What does that mean? What time is it at your house?
Right now it's 7. How did it go in English? 7:15.
7:15.
7:15.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's not too bad. So, wait, what time are we here? I don't have the time on here now. Oh, wait, I got it here. 3. Oh,
okay,
so 4 hour. 4 hour.
4 hours. Okay.
3:15 here, 7:15 there. Okay, good. Well, we could sort something out.
Yeah.
We can work something out. So just message me on the Discord, and then we can do this. Talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
I'll see if I can rope some other people into
it. Yeah. Okay, I'll send you the friend request.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Anselman, and whoever else is here. Everybody else, William. And Nico, thanks for jumping in. That was good.
Yeah,
and we'll,
no problem.
we'll carry on from here because, It's good. It's good. It's a good thing I didn't cover the fairy stories, actually. So we can do it with somebody who's already familiar with it.
Great. And I'm looking forward to reading it again because it's been a while. I did read a lot, but
Yeah.
maybe I'm going to find something new.
Yeah, you will. And like at this point, I've got Tuesdays booked up for Lives of the Saints with Jeremy. And I don't really have anything else. But like I said, if we do on fairy stories, I want to do it as like a short series so that we can actually dig into it. So give me a little bit of time to see if we can find anyone else who might be interested, and then we'll set some dates or times
Yeah,
that work for you.
yeah. If there can be more people, I'm uh, all the happier.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you know of anybody who might want to participate too, that would be great. All right. Well,
Maybe I do. I'll tell you if I can find more people.
okay. All right. Thanks, Nico. All right, I'm going to end the stream, and thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the Duino elegies. And yeah, look forward to doing something with Nico in the future. Bye, everyone.